Namaste and greetings. I, Diya Goswami, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्था, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today we have gathered here for a special talk on the topic Municipal Legislative Reform through the lens of politics and techno-bureaucratic processes by Mr. Vinay Bendu as part of the series The State of Cities #City Conversations. This event is organized by IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi. Now let me take this moment to introduce the gathering. Our speaker for today, Mr. Vinay Bendu, is a researcher and activist for urban reforms, governance, water reforms, and policy. We are honored to have you, sir. Welcome to the session. Moving to the details for the event, we have with us Professor Manjula Bharati, Center for Urban Policy and Governance at the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
We also have Dr. Anant Maringanti, Director at the Hyderabad Urban Lab. We welcome you, sir. As the moderator of the series, we have Dr. Soumyadeep Chattopadhyay, an associate professor at Visva Bharati Santiniketan and a visiting senior fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. We welcome you, sir. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Chattopadhyay to commence the session with his opening remarks and to proceed with the discussion. We look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa, and very good evening to all of you from Shantiniketan. So I think I'm clearly audible to all of you. Yeah.
Yes.
So just a bit about this #series, City Conversation series. The Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI started this series in 2019, and we are fortunate to have with us some of the renowned urban experts from different countries, sharing their ideas on the process of demographic, environmental, economic, political, and social changes in the cities and how to manage these fast-growing cities. So on behalf of the Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies at IMPRI, I welcome you all to this City Conversation series. And today's topic, as it is evident from the title, is related broadly to urban governance in the context of Indian cities. And it is a well-accepted fact that the municipal government in India are historically weak in nature. And in the pre-independence period, the colonial government retained authority over the urban development. And after independence, the framers of Indian constitutions were concerned about the regional fragmentation along the ethnic, religious, or linguistic basis, and put the local self-government in the state list of the Indian constitution. And state governments are provided with considerable discretion over implementation of urban development plan and policies. Accordingly, a number of changes have been introduced at the municipal level by different groups and agencies in the past few years. And these changes are related to, some of these changes are related to governance, some of these changes are related to financial aspects, and as well as the legislative reforms. So in practice, the Union Minister of Urban Development, Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Urban Poverty Alleviation, and the state level urban development departments, they are involved with these changes. Also, there are disparate groups of actors like the different funding agencies, the NGOs, the private sector consultants. They influence this urban policy making. So essentially, the urban governance includes a whole range of actors and institutions with different mandates, with different abilities, and even different visions for their cities. So all these have crucial impacts on the content of the law and on the urban poor and their ability to access the basic urban amenities. So today's lecture is very important and timely. For example, if we take a look at the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, even after more than 25 years of this 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, with its, of course, with its elaborate mandates for for devolution of functions, fund, and functionaries, we are still yet to fully comprehend why some city governments functions so differently among the different states in India. So the title of today's talk is Municipal Legislative Reform through the lens of politics and techno-bureaucratic processes. And we are all eager to listen to today's speaker and the discussants, all of whom they are well-known urban experts, to understand the different municipal legislation and the processes of lawmaking and their wider implications for urban development. So with this few words, let me invite our today's speaker, Mr. Vinay Baindur, to please, you may start your presentation. It's over to you.
Thank you for this opportunity to share some of my research on municipal legislative reform. Thank you to IMPRI, Dr. Soumyadeep, and all the other participants who have joined us here today for coming to this webinar. I am actually quite new to this whole thing, so please bear with me. And of course, I hope this presentation will be useful for our discussions for what is actually interesting for us right these days in terms of urban governance. This is exactly like Dr. Soumyadeep was also saying about the different policy community of urban governance. The policy community consists of bilateral agencies, multilateral funding agencies, and the process that I want to talk about, I mean, I can come to that later, partly to do with the Indo-US FIRE-D project in terms of the model municipal legislation. But to start with, I want to talk about the processes which were involved with the which were followed for the 74th Amendment and the 65th Constitution Amendment. Why I am highlighting this out here? Can we begin the slides? The next one. Yeah. So what I'm covering in today's brief talk is about the legislative processes in the Union government and the Parliament for the 65th Constitution Amendment, which was basically a couple of years or so. But in August 1989, it was passed in the Lok Sabha. And as I describe later, what happened in the Rajya Sabha as well as the 74th Constitution Amendment, which was the final, it took the final shape in the 74th Constitution Amendment. The second one I want to talk about is a very crucial issue about how the involvement of funding agencies takes over entire process of drafting the what is still being called as the specimen model municipal law during the period 2000 to 2003. It's just almost 10 years after the 74th Amendment. And of course, some of the key concerns that I want to raise is regarding federalism, subnational autonomy, and also the constitutional provisions such as Article 252, which I'll talk about later. Next, please. So this is the Festival of Democracy, which has just happened. And I want to talk about, this is actually a cartoon which talks about how Holi was also there just after. And so Festival of Colors following the Festival of Democracy. And of course, the festival of, what I want to talk about is the festival of participation, people's participation. Okay, next please. So we do have on an average, a good turnout for various levels of government. I think at the state level, there was some 60 to 70%, and at some other levels, maybe it is 35 to 40%. But what I am seeing is that the processes have moved in the direction of shutting out the people from participation in local government. And what I'm questioning is who is really benefiting from this limited participation? Does it benefit anyone? And the losses that we as citizens and government, um, after all, it is our government, our elected government, incur due to such restrictions, because it creates either a vacuum or a first come first position for people who are more privileged or who have special arrangements. I go to the next, please. So some of the key documents I've referred is the texts of the 74th and the 65th Constitution Amendment. Professor K.C. Shivram Krishnan's book, Power to the People, The Politics and Progress of Decentralization, which came out in 2000, which basically illustrates, in detail, every instance, every part of the processes that went through during the passage of the 65th Amendment as well as the 74th Constitution Amendment. Of course, I also refer to various documents which are there from the Model Municipal Law from 2000-2003. And this is what is called the Indo-US FIRE-D project. I'll just describe what FIRE-D actually stands for. I would not like to get into the usual problems with the alphabet soup that that gets created when we talk about urban reforms. Then I also looked at some of these documents which are listed here, and we have received some more or less, contradictory replies from the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi. And there is also some information I've used from a blog called Nagrika. Next, please. So to start with, one of the most important parts of the whole 65th Constitution Amendment process is that after the assassination of the former Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, at that time, the new government which was formed had one of the largest number of seats in Lok Sabha, elected to Lok Sabha. In the 64th and 65th Constitution Amendment is also the largest written addition to the Constitution in terms of, minor amendments, minor constitutional amendments of various kinds were made, but also it was at this point, I think in 1989, that when it was passed in the Lok Sabha, it was something like 38 different functional domains. 38 different functional domains, which include employment, industrialization, sorry, not industrialization, but I had water supply, local transport, municipal housing, and as well as investment, promotion, and development of industrial and commercial estates, public distribution system. These are only some of the ones which I'm highlighting here because this was something which happened before the new economic policy, and new economic policy altered the text of the Constitution Amendment. And in the 74th Constitution, in the case of the 64th and 65th Constitution Amendment, the Rajya Sabha voted in October 1989, almost 2 months later, and defeated both these Constitution amendments by 3 votes. So if they had 3 more votes, they would have been successful. But the important point here is that what I'm describing is how every different representative, every different bureaucracy, members of the bureaucracy, as well as mayors state urban development ministers, state ministers from other ministries, chief secretaries, chief ministers, and leaders of political parties, and various other forms of debate and discussion were also held, and there were dissent. There were various kinds of dissent as well, even against this, very large elected party. But even then, in the October 1989, it was defeated. After that, during this very turbulent period in the Indian politics, we had two more short-term, very short-lived governments by VP Singh and Chandrasekhar when they were the prime ministers. But then we come to the 74th Constitution Amendment, and in the Lok Sabha, this is now a Congress minority government, which has only about 212 or 211 seats out of 511, and probably with support from different agencies outside. But almost as soon as it is elected in June 1991, the budget for the new economic policy is introduced when Mr. Manmohan Singh, Dr. Manmohan Singh, became the finance minister. It's a question of how this changes the text of the 74th Amendment. But I think I'm not going to go much more into detail on that right now, except to say that one remarkable point which Professor Shivaram Krishnan highlights in his book, which I have mentioned earlier, is that two items became more contentious than others. One related to the setting up of wards committees and zonal committees. That's actually this is one of the items, not both of the items. Sorry, ward committees and zonal committees as a measure for enhancing proximity between citizens and representatives. So, so the issue of how that should be drafted, whether what kind of process should be there, how much prescription, how much detail should be there in the text of the 74th Constitutional Amendment. Sorry, I'll refer back to the 65th again, because this is an interesting part of the whole thing, which gets left out in the 74th Constitutional Amendment. And when it comes to ward committees, and here the description is the wards committee, the WARDS committee. It basically says that how do you elect the members of the ward committee? So it's actually direct election. Now, the persons who will be chosen for the direct election from the territorial areas of the ward committee will become members of the ward committee. So this is actually the most, in terms of participation, most progressive, in the sense of elected representative will also be a member of the ward committee, as well as the elected councillor who will be the chairman of the ward committee. This is a part which actually changes in the 74th Constitution Amendment, and direct election is actually removed. So when you are looking at, recognition, regular elections, reservations, representation, these were all many of the state governments had already passed this by the 74th Amendment, either through ordinance or through new legislation or through amendment to existing legislations. By 1997, 98, most of them should have been done it by 94, but at least a few years later. Tamil Nadu, for example, passed something in 1998. Of course, some state governments also use the help of consultants for drafting the new amendments in conformity with the 74th Amendment. So while I am highlighting here that there is, I mean, similarity between the 65th and 74th Amendment substantially, one of the crucial changes I have also talked about, but the processes were almost similar. It went through quite rigorous debate and discussion in various levels of government, as well as, I mean, elected representatives as well as government. So it happened that this one was a minority government. This happened after the new economic policy, and also the introduction of the industrial townships, part of it, happened with the 74th Amendment, which was probably, something which is, still controversial, and it's something to highlight. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So now I want to come to whose law is it really anyway? I mean, I'm not the one who's. This is not my title. This is somebody else's idea of what actually whose law is it anyway. This is where I'm talking about the model municipal legislation, also known as specimen model law. Sorry, so not model municipal legislation, but model municipal law. So here the important part is that well early in the 90s itself, the Ministry of Finance had already entered into a special arrangement, or you can say an agreement, with the Indo-US, I mean, what is called the Indo-US FIRE-D project, and also FIRE. Sorry, FIRE-D is actually the D is missing here, but it's actually the debt component. But there is also something which is called the credit component. But so the special arrangement draft or signed copy is not publicly available, and this information only came out after a report was issued in 2013 that this special arrangement existed for almost nearly 20 years. This is the project which actually went through different phases, 3 different phases, and was involved with almost every different aspect of local government, especially municipal government, municipal institutions, development authorities, and a variety of other agencies through their funding, through their special arrangement. I think we should still find out more about this, what this special arrangement was, because this text is not available anywhere. Next slide, please. So, according to the right to information replies that I received in 2009 August from the National Institute of Urban Affairs in Delhi, to which we had filed a number of RTIs regarding the tenders issued for the model municipal law, the process of drafting the model municipal law, who were the drafting committee. We had a number of RTIs. The Urban Ministry basically said that in a reply to one of the RTIs, that they invited the FIRE-D project members to join the drafting process of the specimen municipal law. It doesn't mean exactly, because this is what I'm saying is contradictory, because later on I've received a number of other replies in 2010 which goes into in detail what they actually did not tell in the first reply. So what I see is that compared to both the CAS, where we talked about all the consultations and debates were held, the MML really did not seem to go through any such consultations with elected representatives, MLAs, MPs, councillors, corporators, any of them. But then they were brought in as ordinances, and in some cases were passed as is. Now, what I'm saying is, as is a better way of saying copy paste. It's literally, if you see any of the documents and compare it to the model municipal legislation text, especially in Odisha, Sikkim, Rajasthan, Bihar, and some of these other states, some other states, you can see that the text is actually just lifted from the model municipal law and brought in. A few changes or a few additions were there in the case of Odisha. And now, at this point in time, the reference to the original document and the municipal legislation which were amended, or new legislation was passed, or in the case of Bihar, ordinance was issued and then it was passed in the assembly. So the question is really, what was the process for consulting with different political parties, or say that the policy is actually being prepared, or what is the policy which was prepared? All this was done by the USAID FIRED project. They prepared a set of 4 different policy options, policy option papers, and then we don't know who actually allowed them to choose one particular policy option and drop the other policy options. But it's still controversial. So sorry, it's still contradictory. So I want to just mention here that the document which refers to, for example, all these RTIs which I received in 2010, what I'm asking for is certified copies of shortlisting, like tenders and notifications, and the list of organizations shortlisted for preparing the draft model law. So the reply which comes is that no tenders were issued, but Government of India funds were not really utilized for preparing of model municipal law. Now, who actually prepared the final list of consultants for this law, and who so to ask them to provide the minutes of selection committee meetings, for example? Again, they say the same thing. We do not have the remaining required information. Required information. Now, this is what I'm saying is controversial. They claim that there was no agreement between Ministry of Urban Development and or National Institute of Urban Affairs. In another reply to the RTI, the FIRED project and the Times Research Foundation, which actually did the consultancy for the FIRED, and no other government or non-government organization agencies in relation to preparing the draft model municipal law. So they claim a completely hands-off position almost. So this is contradictory, because earlier they claim in 2009 that they asked the FIRED to join the process, and then the answers are, we do not have the required information. There are so many of them which says we do not have the required information, as if they have been kept in the dark, or they are willing to say that they were kept in the dark. Now, one of the important critiques of the entire process was again Professor K.C. Sivaramakrishnan in 2004, when he presented a paper at New Delhi in June 2004. He actually talks about the entire process of how municipal government should actually be involved with urban poverty alleviation, slum slum issues, and it's a mandatory or an obligatory function of municipal governments, and how the municipal law really completely ignores the entire issue and or neglects the entire issue. There's only one mention of slum issues. There's only one time mention in the entire 200 to 300 page document. But the focus, of course, the model municipal law talks about is actually outsourcing infrastructure development for water supply, solid waste, environmental management, and 4 to 5 different things, depending on the capacity of the local government. So the local government can, depending on its capacity, outsource. Depending on lack of capacity, outsource all these different tasks. And this is now one of the most crucial reasons for the the municipal law being prepared, being drafted, the urban sector reform agenda. Now, the Ministry of Urban Development claims that the urban sector reform agenda is their own agenda, while it's very clear that it's because of this special arrangement between the USAID and the government of the Ministry of Finance that this agenda or this reform agenda is being pushed. Its crucial aspects are because there were various fights, there were various protests, there were various contestations happening in different parts of the country, different parts of during different times against the privatization of water supply or municipal garbage contracts or various other things, which are the obligatory functions of municipal bodies, municipal governments. But the entire process was, the entire model municipal law process was allowed at the time when most of these protests or contestations were unaware of the model municipal law, and it became municipal legislation in states. For example, we can go to the next slide. In the case of Bihar and Odisha, which are among the least urbanized states, maybe Bihar and UP and maybe even other states, Rajasthan, for example. So regional parties in these states, which were in coalition with the BJP, sorry, the thing is actually in the past, so it's which were in coalition with the BJP or BJP ruled states themselves, they passed the new municipal acts during the UPA 1 and UPA 2 government tenures. Now, the issue is whether it's like an invisible link between the NDA and the model municipal law, because it happened to be passed, to be drafted during the tenure of the NDA 1. On the other hand, the chief ministers of Assam and Haryana in 2012, we have the National Urbanization Subcommittee. The Urbanization Subcommittee was set up as a subcommittee of the National Development Council, which is the highest political decision-making body with all the chief ministers and the prime minister as members. In 2012, this subcommittee on urbanization raised the issue through these two chief ministers, Mr. Tarun Gogoi and Mr. Bhupender Hooda at that time. Why Article 252 of the Constitution is being used, and why it should not be used for forcing states to adopt the model municipal law. And this is to the subcommittee of urbanization, which has all chief ministers, different government, different state government chief ministers, as well as the prime, and the report goes to the prime minister. It's not. I'm not sure whether actually the government had used this Article 252, but they were protesting against it. They were already contesting this. And in fact, the Chief Minister Assam actually in that committee meeting, the minutes, he's saying that we need a policy of ruralization and not policy of pushing this model municipal legislation for Assam. What we need is a ruralization policy. That's what he said. I think this is a contrast which I'm just drawing here, which is both political processes involved, the political processes which are invisible links between the NDA and the model municipal law, and how the chief ministers of Congress governments, raise this issue with the UPA coalition government in 2012. What I am actually pointing to out here is that Article 252 is basically when two or more states. I can't see the text of it out here right now because of this. But two or more states are trying to raise the legal option, and then ask the union government, in which the case the union government doesn't have any, because it doesn't come in the union government list, but it comes in state list or concurrent list sometimes, to allow the union government to pass this legislation. Of course, the model municipal law never reached that situation because it was basically done outside, almost outside elected assemblies and elected governments. Sorry, not elected governments, but elected assemblies or MLAs or corporators, MPs, etc. But the bureaucracy, the consultants, this is why I'm saying techno bureaucracy, were involved, and the policy community was involved. Next slide, please. I think I'm coming to the end of the talk. Yeah. So I'm not going to dwell too much on it further because I can't really, communicate about the some of the data, missing data, which is crucial to arrive at a more specific conclusion on this. But I just want to say that even in this law, as I'm saying, the ward committee and the wards committee, the issue of participation, which I talked about in 65th Amendment and the 74th Constitution Amendment. In this model municipal law, it is considered that wards committees, which is more than one ward, two to three wards or more, will be formed, consisting of only councillors, and among them, one of the councillors will be elected as the chairperson. And this wards committee will be the one which has executive powers. On the other hand, one ward committee per ward will also be formed, but this will consist of only citizens. So there will not even be any elected representative, and this will have only an advisory role. So the question becomes that, the whole issue of how wards committees should function or ward committees should function with both the citizens. I think we should not only expand it to the citizens, but people from the ward, not only those who are voters in the ward. And of course, we have had discussions about area sabhas and other different institutions like that. But how the councillors and others will also be a part of it. Of course, there will be an elected chairperson, but we should also think of why the 65th Constitution Amendment really talked about direct election of ward committee members. So the model municipal law is going so far as to separate the councillors committee, which is executive powers, from the citizens committee, which has only an advisory role. Now, I think we need to find out what has actually happened out of these proposed sections in the model municipal law. How governments in Odisha or governments in the government of Odisha and municipal governments in Odisha or in Bihar or any other place where they've actually formed such committees, and how, if at all, they were formed, have they been functioning? So there's no real answer of this. What should be this such a separate arrangement for? But of course, these separate arrangements already existed. For example, in Tamil Nadu, it is claimed that it is already a similar arrangement, like a zonal or a borough committee. But where new zonal committees can be formed, if zonal committees are going to be allowed in through new legislation, so what shape will they take, and how will they allow citizens' participation or people's participation to happen? I'm almost to the end of the talk, so I maybe there's one last slide. Yeah. So I just want to see whether we can actually think of a larger process for a process audit and a content audit, and how we can shine a light on these laws. Because the impact of these reforms, if they have not gone through any process of any democratic process, except to pass it as cut and paste legislation through ordinances, and then through, because you have a majority in the assembly, or you have a coalition government which has a majority in the assembly, this will really, and this happened so soon after the passage of the 74th Constitution Amendment, within a period of 6 to 7 years. So I think we should really look at why or how why we need such an audit, and how we can actually do such an audit, if a larger group of people can be involved, and a larger group of researchers can take it up, because this is another aspect, I think, which I want to highlight here, which came up later, is that this whole process is under the guise of bringing in a unified municipal law. A unified municipal law is actually municipalities, municipal corporations, and other municipal bodies. All of them should be combined into one law, according to one of the intents of this model municipal law. Of course, probably in every state before 74th Amendment, we had different laws for municipal corporations, we had different laws for municipalities, and they were at different points in time, 30 to 40 years before the 74th Amendment was passed. But now, what is the need for identifying a unified municipal law? Is there a way to bring about a unified municipal law? And is that going to be a reform? Is that going to be a is that going to be something that helps people's participation move ahead, or improves the quality of people's participation, or improves the quality of how we can get ward committees or area sabhas or other such institutions good experience in working with municipal elected councils, elected councillors, instead of only being adversarial or just contestation. How people's participation can get integrated into the process of local government, because that is what is really required. And because that is not happening, and that has not happened to a large extent in many states and many cities, we still lack serious, we still lack good experience in terms of how this legislation or these legislations will work for us. So with that, I'll just like to thank all of you, and thanks.
So thank you for presenting some interesting issues. Like you talked about the formation of the 62 important acts. One is 65th Constitutional Amendment Act, and the other one is 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. And also, you touched upon some of the important issues, the role of the funding agencies in drafting the specimen model municipal law. And you mentioned like how the model municipal law somehow escapes the public discussion and scrutiny, and how it facilitates the outsourcing of some of the basic services, outsourcing as well as privatization of some of the basic services, which are the obligatory functions of the city government. And also you draw our attention to the aspect of limited and sort of what we say, the cosmetic participation, people's participation in local governance. And even in the context of model municipal law, you mentioned about the inherent inconsistency in the form of the provision of wards committee with councillors having the executive power, at the same time ward committee with the citizens having the advisory role. So, and it really raises some uneasy questions about how to approach these entire urban governance issues, and how to really walk this public participation meaningful, so that we can have some betterment in our entire urban governance structure. So I'm sure that our discussions will shed some more light into into today's topic of discussion. So let me first request Dr. Marindanti to please, if you please share your views on today's presentation. It's over to you, Dr. Marindanti.
I was actually hoping that Manjula will speak first. Manjula, I still want to ask you, do you want to do that? Do you want to go first?
No, Anand, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. The reason why I was asking if I could go a little later is because this line of thinking that Vinay, you presented now is something that I've heard from you first in 2005. And I've been following this for the last 17 years. All right. I think I actually have just 3 or 4 very simple points to make. One is that we have done a lot of work on what formal governance systems and structures look like. We've done a lot of work on what policy documents look like. We haven't done enough work on what political cultures actually are. And I think that's a very, very important thing for us to think about. And I remember one of the larger research projects that KCS was involved in towards in 2012, 2013 was actually one that was kind of triggered by a conversation between him and me, in which I asked him what makes us believe that if we have a constitutional amendment that is going to directly translate into something on the ground. A very simple issue. I have known municipal corporation in Hyderabad to be a very powerful body until 1970. We have had mayors here who were able to actually go out onto the streets and challenge the chief minister. Right? The city was an entity in itself. Corporators did not dream of becoming MLS. corporators thought of that as a long-term occupation. And corporators were very well educated sometimes. It was something that one did. It was part of the political culture of the city. And after that, without any change in the constitution, without any change in the municipal law, gradually you see that over the next 10-15 years, the municipal corporation of the city of Hyderabad becomes completely redundant. Now, how did this deactivation of the municipal politics actually happen without any change on paper? Nothing had to be done. No law was changed. Sometimes executive power was used, but I would argue that even the use of that executive power can be understood in terms of political cultures. It was decided, for example, that we are not going to hold elections for the next couple of years, using the executive authority that is vested in the chief minister's office all the way down to the municipal commissioner's office. And then you appoint a line department officer as the commissioner, and then you're done, you're set. You don't have to do anything at all, right? So essentially, there is a big story here about municipal political cultures, which I think we have completely missed in our analysis over the last many years. What we have done is to think of that municipal politics in terms of civil society and in terms of political society, and the kind of the line that we drew between the two of them essentially made it impossible for us to make any fruitful analysis of what's going on. How are people actually getting organized through a variety of local caste-based associations, trade-based associations, right? Where is all of that energy which is feeding into the municipal elections? Sometimes it says that I will not have anything to do with the municipality. Sometimes it says that I'm going to get involved in the municipality. Sometimes it says that I'm going to reach way above the municipality and reach the chief minister's office through either some kind of a bureaucratic connection or through some kind of MLA networks, right? And sometimes it may say that I'm going to go right all the way up to the prime minister's office because I have the access. And we have seen evidence for all of these things. Every time you got a JNNRM project approved of, you knew that all of these different networks came into play. So I think the point that we really need to be very careful about is that the techno-bureaucratic networks come in along with all of these attendant politics that can never be scrubbed clean from the techno-bureaucratic networks. And that's where actually the most exciting stuff actually happens. So that's number one. First point that I want to make is that we need to pay attention to the stuff of life, political life in our cities. Second thing which I think is very important is that something very significant has happened in the last 20 years, 25 years. And I'm saying 25 because the India Infrastructure Report was published in 1996. And the India Infrastructure Report essentially does a number of things. One of them is to make the Planning Commission sort of redundant. Because what it does is to promise you a huge growth rate and says that this kind of a growth is possible if you can mobilize this kind of funds, and this kind of funds can only be mobilized through the market and not from state allocations. Now, you have a situation in which the Planning Commission simply has no role to play. You can keep making small, playful allocations here and there, but you don't really mean much in this new context. That's number one. The second thing was That was the first document which really pushed for making the case that urban infrastructure is very important. Cities are the engines of growth. And the narrative that came about because of this idea that cities are engines of growth is that in reality, some cities are engines of growth, not all cities. Therefore, what happens is that the only meaningful thing for many cities to attempt is to try and become that city which is the engine of growth. So they start really trying to imagine themselves in terms of signature infrastructures, in terms of monetization of land, in terms of try and attracting businesses of certain kinds, specializing in certain ways, right? So you have an education city, you have some other city, you have something else, and in the process, you have a number of towns and cities which actually were thriving urban centers become completely irrelevant. Take Sholapur, for example, right? Sholapur, which was a big center for textiles, becomes completely irrelevant. I mean, that at the most, it is some kind of a real estate center until it can find its new place under the sun. And I think what this essentially means is that all of these ideas about working with the municipal corporator, working with the commissioner, working with the mayor, working with the ward committees and so on and so forth, are likely to be, number one, effective in certain cities and not at all in certain cities. Because in certain cities, decisions about capital investments, the mobility of capital and resources, etc., is decided already by someone else somewhere else. It's a fixed game. It's over. You can't do anything in that space, right? What you can possibly do, even in those kinds of cities, is to do a little bit of figuring out what could potentially be a political surface on which we can act, but it's going to be very limited. But you take a small town like Chandrapur, there's a lot that could possibly be done, at least for a few years, because there is a lot of possibilities now at this point of time. So we need to push for that. So I think the second point that I want to make is that the idea that some kind of a uniform municipal law is being applied, you know, almost like some kind of a marmalade being applied on a slice of bread, is not quite what is happening. What is actually happening is that there are all kinds of struggles. Each town and city is behaving in a very different way, but you can see patterns in that. Certain things, certain logics take root in particular places, but they also get resisted in very different ways. For example, in Vijayawada in 2009, I saw this very interesting situation where the municipal corporation said, we are going to now impose a user fee on garbage collection. And the interesting thing was that the Hotels Association of Vijayawada got together and said that go to hell, we will buy 10 acres of land and we will do our own garbage clearance. We will not pay any additional taxes to the municipality. Right? And then the municipal, at the municipal level, the local left parties gather together and say that, okay, before you do this, please tell us what happened to all the assigned revenues. How much of the assigned revenues have you actually received? How much of corruption have you actually plugged until now? Show us that you have done your due diligence and then ask us for more money. Until then, we will not give anything. Right? Now, this is something that should possibly happen in one town. It cannot happen everywhere else. So I think one of the interesting things that has happened in the last 5, 6, 7 years is with all of these smart city missions and Hriday and Amrit and all of that, and all of these new kinds of chief ministers fellows, some other fellows, something else, there is some kind of an energy that is emerging in small towns. It's very uneven, and I think that we really need to pay attention to what is happening in those towns. And that is where we can possibly see a lot of new regional formations emerging, which are not going to be uniform at all. So I think that one useful thing for us to do would be to start looking at this whole problem from the point of view of resistance, from the point of view of friction, from the point of view of traction, because none of these laws actually can be implemented in a uniform way everywhere. Nowhere can that actually happen. The moment we start looking at it from the point of view, where is there friction, you will start learning a lot of new things along the way. So let's stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for raising some very interesting points. And you mentioned about the difference in the political cultures and the interconnectedness with the techno-bureaucratic networks. And just I would like to mention, like, I recently come up with one recent book by Governing Locally. I think I'm just seeing Babu Jacob, he's here. So he's one of the leading author of that particular book, where and that book very nicely represents how the state-local relation and the role of state bureaucracy actually shape the implementation of all these 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and actually gives a very interesting description of two contrasting states. One is Gujarat, another is Kerala, and the important distinction was there, like why in Gujarat the local government, they somehow enjoy greater autonomy as compared to the autonomy which the local governments in Kerala they are enjoying. So these are very interesting insights that book actually has given us. So anyway, so I'm sure that Mr. Binder will respond to all your thoughts and all these things. So but before that, may I now request Professor Bharati to share your thoughts? Yeah, it's over to you.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
So thank you, P, for this session, and thank you, Vinay, and thank you, Anand, for like pitching these issues in from different perspectives. And I feel that when we try to understand the municipal legislative reforms through the lens of the politics and the techno-bureaucratic process in India, given its historicity of colonialism, I feel it is important also to locate the literature of urban local governance within the developing countries, where the decentralization and the democratization experiments witness, like a very profound political transformations, and very specifically in the working class politics, but struggling hard in the space of globalization, which really, like in a way weakened the ability of the nation states to deploy the regulatory and the redistributive instruments, especially when we are looking at locating that, in the domains of local governance. And I feel this is visible very specifically in three-dimensional perspectives. That is, when we speak about the ideologies and the imperativeness of the local governance and why it is needed, and then the institutions like the urban local bodies to institutionalize this ideology and the manifested practices. So we have to understand how do the ideologies envisaged for the local democracy, for deepening democracy at the urban context, translated as practices, what are the divergences, and why such gap between the ideology and the practices, and how are these formed, and how are these been maintained, and how to resist this kind of inconsistencies between a proposed ideology of deepening the participative democracy, like Vinay was speaking about through a lot of historical spaces, and then also the whole question of manifested practices when we look through the framework of politics and bureaucracy. At ULBs, I specifically feel, that one of the things, very interesting thing I felt when I was listening to Vinay was the mentioning in just one place the name slums. It just struck me, So we are speaking about deepening democracy. We are speaking about politics of the marginals. We are speaking about inclusive democracy. But how hegemonizing the idea, and how even through the re-institutionalization of an institutional structure to deepen democracy. What are the ways in which we hegemonize the power structures, and where are the politics of marginals in this discourse that we are speaking about, multiple discourses and narratives happening. So, like my studies was basically mostly done on the rural spaces, panchayats. And then, like that where, like I see that whenever there any change in the power structure systems, or whenever the people at the margins try to question the corrupt practices at the panchayat or the municipalities, or when they start exercising their agencies in the urban local bodies, where actually, in fact, they are exercising their agency against the hegemonic power centers at the local level, we could see that there is a violent backlash. It could be against Dalits, it could be against women, it could be against tribals. So how then, this male-centric bureaucratic patriarchal order, which he speaks about, when we are looking at the legislation, how can we look through this lens, So we always been, like that Anand was speaking about, it's important to look at that, from the perspectives of, friction that is happening, and then, the kind of power struggles. But I also feel that it is important to look the municipalities, the urban local bodies, from the perspective of, the governmentality, where I really question, the Partha Chatterjee's understanding of the civil society as a privileged one, and then the working political society as the one, who is fighting for that distinction in the grassroots level politics of India. It seems to be blurred, where we are looking at the resistance struggle of the auto rickshaw pullers, resistance struggle of the sanitation workers, so where one to kind of, make the borders between the civil society and the political society, and taking one as a privileged society is not able to, I am not able to make that kind of distinctive structures. So, but one also has to think that to govern, when we are saying about to have certain structures for governing, is to exercise power. And there is absolutely no a priori reasons why more localized forms of governance are more democratic. Indeed, like there are, like Vinay was saying about our colonial history, is actually history of decentralized authority in which, order was secured and revenues extracted through local politics and local despots. So, this we cannot say that. And the new formulations that, like saying about the 73rd and the 74th Amendment, and especially now in a place when that has been driven by the international development agencies, how then that has been associated with rolling back of the state is very important, an extension of the bureaucratic control and the marketization of the social service, and how in this space, the politics of the marginals, like in one side, we are speaking about inclusive democracy, deepening democracy, other side, the institutions are getting, more marketized with the state rolling back and the extension of the bureaucratic, technocratic control and the marketization of the social services. How then the urban local bodies need to be seen as a space of institutional framework. And, so then the decentralization, even when we are speaking about decentralization as an important centerpiece of modernizing this democratic discourses of developing the world state elites and the international development community, we also need to understand shifting decision-making, allocative and implementation functions of the central state, provincial state to the local governments has proven difficult for basically three reasons. First, I feel it's the states, and those who control them have little interest in decentralization. So whenever we are saying about, the center need to come to the state and state to kind of devolve down to the municipalities, are the states interested in it, so that is it. And then the second is that, institutional revising needs to be completed to work towards the process of decentralization. So even when, commit themselves to the decentralization, we know that the task is Herculean, because I have, like recently completed my book, brick by brick. I've given a, a seminar, a webinar here, looking at the people planning campaign, one of the biggest decentralized exercise in India, where 35 to 40% of the state plan fund devolved down to the people, and the Herculean task of the bureaucratic ways of decentralizing that to align with the decentralization mechanisms. Then that how the new laws and regulations to be passed, personnel to be redeployed, resources to be rechanneled, local administrative capacities to be built up. So this all institution building, we need a technocratic thing. So we cannot go. My argument is that we cannot get go of this technocratic vision in that or technocratic phase of that so then even in the when you're looking at the decentralization, two completely different ideas. One is a technocratic vision of that, and other one is a participative, mobilizing, communitarian perspectives. Looking at the decentralization. But I feel the former idea, looking at more basically from a technocratic vision of the decentralization of the local governance, is equated, with the task of designing appropriate institution structure of which can be derived basically from the public administration, finance, and planning. It has actually been informed by an unbounded faith, I feel, in the ability of the experts. So that is my area of problem coming in that. With this technocratic vision, their faith in the ability of the experts to apprehend and transform the world. So this question of the technocentric privileging the local governance structure, where I would like to take the Foucauldian understanding of how the expert becomes important. It's deeply rational and deeply depoliticizing kind of local governance. So that is something which we need to understand. But when that if technocratic vision understands institutions at the expense of mobilization, but then the mobilization of the local group, the participative stance, which has been standard on the other one, which Pranab Bardhan was speaking about, that mobilization at the expense of institutions. So for me, when I'm trying to look at that, the most important thing I feel is that no doubt, is that democratic decentralization is a political project. It is a political project. And then, the idea that governance is largely technical organizational suffers from the two critical flaws. On one hand, no technical or organizational process is ever immune. They themselves are being, subject to the power and politics. And even among bureaucrats, general bureaucrats and technocrats try to wield. There is a difference of, a very interesting article also speaks about it, how there is a power that is happening between the bureaucrats, as one as a technocrats and other as a general bureaucrats, and how the differences in the power politics and the governmentality working in that. So I would like, to end the saying about, the most important one is that, whatever we are speaking about it, it is important to understand the devolution of power, not the delegation of power like that is happening, and then opening up of how that opens up new channels of power, where the power could penetrate, social spaces, and when that power could penetrate, it could destabilize the existing hegemonic power structures, and then that restructures, that destabilization of the power structures definitely will manifest as violent kind of, attacking against, violent practices against those practices which question these hegemonic structures. But it is important to go on, understand the resistances that is happening in it. And even, I feel that, there are empty number of examples you could see, that I've studied that in Karnataka, in Bihar, Rajasthan, Kerala, that all these places we could see that, okay, whenever we try to redistribute the power politics, then there is always a tendency from the power fielders to reframe themselves as the wielders of power again, to make them powerful and have the due share of the social cake. That is what, we're saying, that after, all the processes, still the chief minister can take away all the power structures that has been given to the local governance institutions with one order. So how can you take away that? And through the very same apparatus of decentralization, you can bring the hegemonic norms of centralization again and then to express their opinions, to evolve from their lived experience, the language of power, and bridge the social gulfs. So the most significant contribution I feel of the constitutional amendment is that it tried to deepen the democracy, political inclusion, and participation of the marginals. So I felt, the politics of the marginals of the society is very, very important. There is empirical evidence to suggest that the politics of presence of the marginals at the decision making, whether they have been resisted, whether they have been suppressed, that resistance is important to understand, where there is the spaces for them to evolve as active citizen subject. So I would like, end with asking certain questions, here. How the power of the knowledge society is derived from the technological advances and also from the growth of the power elites and how they institutionalize them. And that we speak about, these usual things that, we speak about green bag effect. I would like to end by asking very pertinent questions through my researches. We are sure that meanings are molded, meanings are refashioned, they are understood to suit the established order of things. In the process of resistances and negotiation of power, they set the limits of our thought and imagination. So it is important in this process, the politics of reimagining the marginals to non-articulation and exclusion from the peculiar process. So we have to ask this question, when the marginals is compelled to assume the incognito and pose many questions. What governs the exclusion? What grids of exclusion are used to define the marginal? What disciplinary mechanism work to reproduce the site of the marginal? Whose politics makes it marginal? Whose bureaucratic language makes it marginal? Is the distinction between the center and the marginal more amorphous than we imagine? How does the marginal manifest itself in the everyday life in the realm of local governance and governmentality? So with these questions, I would like to end. It is important to look these questions. The silent spaces need to be deconstructed and to understand the bureaucratic language and the technocratic language and how they exercise their agency to negotiate the hegemonies and governmentalities of the power structures at local levels of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Manjula, for raising some very pertinent point related to the complexities as well as the disjuncture between the rhetoric and realities of democratic decentralization. And just to add to your insights, like you talked about the civil society and political society, and I think another important tool, theoretical tool, which is very much helpful for understanding this power relation and power struggles, is the concept of party society, because in case of West Bengal also, this concept of party society is very much relevant in the sense that it is like all these institutions of local government and even the ward committees, these are very much politicized in nature, and these actually interferes a lot with the democratic functioning or of the city governments as a whole. So anyway, so I'm sure that Mr. Baindur will respond to some of the discussions, some of the observations which have been raised here. Now, is it possible, just with the permission of all our discussion and obviously the speaker, may I now request, I'm just saying that Mr. Babu Jacob is here. So is it possible, Dr. Arjun, to incorporate to have his views, because that will be, I think, add to today's discussion, because the techno-bureaucratic networks we are talking about, and this will be very much important. So is it possible, Dr. Arjun, to have him?
Yes, yes, sir, he's here.
Yes, if you please just.
Yes, Dr. Somadeep, what would you like me to do.
Yes, so if you please share your comments on these techno-bureaucratic networks and how it actually impacts the local government functioning as well as the larger issues of local governance.
Yeah, I've been listening to the learner speakers who
Please go ahead.
can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, we can hear you.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
So, you know, the kind of studies that I undertook showed that the decentralization has not really happened. In the sense, in most of India, in most states of India, following upon the constitutional amendment, 74th Amendment for municipalities, all states passed the legislation as required by the constitutional amendment within a year of the passing of the constitutional amendment. But that law has not been able to bring about a real decentralization of authority, that is decentralization of government authority to the localities or the local governments. So earlier, Mr. Vinay, I think, was emphasizing the law part of it. The law is an important factor in this, but the law only enables actually. In the process of a policy getting transmitted as an action at the ground level, the law is only one of the intermediary things. Following upon the law, there are rules and there are other instructions, and there are administrative mostly, which create what the law stipulates. That process has not happened. So there is also emphasis on participation. The whole idea of a local government itself is what? To make people participate. Because in the larger democratic bodies like the parliament or the state legislative assemblies, you elect representatives. Your representatives are only managing the government and running the government and working for public welfare. But you may not even know them, and they don't know you. But here, by participation, you have a government in a small community, namely a small town or municipality, where the councillor is known to you.
Yes, yes.
The need for providing civic services at the basis of the whole thing of local government. But the local government authority lacking with them, they are not able to perform. This is what my research found. And the other participation, Mr. Vinay was talking about committees and WhatsApps and all that. They become meaningful with participation. Now, what is participation? Participation in authority. And if the authority is missing in the local government, there is no participation. You may be present there in a meeting, but it doesn't become participation. Therefore, there is no participation in either sense, either through the government itself, which is not having the required authority as was stipulated by the constitutional amendment, nor are bodies like WhatsApp, if they exist. In many states, they don't even exist. If they exist, their own authority is not there, because that authority is derived from the authority of the local government itself. This is what I would like to say. So therefore, it's not, I said it's not the law only. Then what is it, you may ask? It is a capacity that is authority in the form capacity that a local government gets. That capacity comes from two things as I found, and what is lacking and why local government is not effective, as I said, is the capacity is on account of two things. One is they're not able to decide internally. They're not given the freedom to decide internally how to take decisions. Who will decide at what level? Whether the council will decide on certain matters, or the standing committee will do, or whether the chief bureaucrat will do, or the chief engineer will do. This kind of configuration of the authority relationship within the government, that freedom is not given to them. It's all directed from the state government. Second, they don't have an organization. Basically, for any government, it needs an organization allowed to create an organization, like water supply has been given to them. They need, therefore, a set of water engineers. Those water engineers are still working with the state government. They have not been given, although their responsibility is to provide water to a particular municipality. That municipal government is not having any organization for water. Similarly for sewerage, similarly for street lighting, similarly for all the 18 functions which have been given. Therefore, lack of organization and lack of authority to decide the functioning of the government itself, the relationships within the government, both have been denied. But the law looks all right in many of these states. The law empowers, but the empowerment can translate into action only if you have the capacity in the form of these two things and associated matters. Those are all denied to them. Therefore, virtually, what is decentralized is re-centralized. Decentralized in law, but re-centralized in practice. Shall I stop here for the time being?
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your views. So I think let's let's move over to Mr. Vinay. Your thoughts on all our discussions, the points that they have raised.
So I was actually trying to emphasize about representation and reservation in the 74th Amendment. But really the issue is, one of the issues that we need to look at and audit, and highlighted by what Babu Jacob was also saying, is that the provisions in the law which goes against the 74th Amendment. And this is actually the section at the very end of the 74th Amendment, which says that within a period of 1 year, which is 93, 94, 95, whatever it is, should be modified, amendment, repealed, whatever, if it goes against the 74th Amendment. So actually what we are saying about this epidemic of centralization, which I was actually referring to in a previous webinar, is that with all these schemes which are benefiting small sections like 1% or 2% of the population in the city, or it is covering 2% of the area of the city, and all the infrastructure funding and everything is going in there with special purpose vehicles, with smart cities and all these data surveillance, etc., etc. All these issues are raising different. All these are actually raising different encroachments on the 74th Amendment, encroachments on the municipal function space. But what we should actually audit, like I was saying earlier, is what all was repealed, if at all it was repealed, in any of the states, in any of the municipal governments, wherever it was supposed to happen. I mean, there is a controversial issue whether it is actually, a lot of people were trying to take the development authorities to court, saying that local authorities like the municipal government or the local government should be in charge of all land as well. For example, the development authorities are in charge of land, preparing development layouts, extensions, and parts of the city, which, I mean, of course, benefiting more elite or richer sections of the population again. But that it should be brought under the local government. And therefore, they went to court, and they went to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court upheld development authorities as a local authority in a Supreme Court judgment in, I think, something like 2007 or 2008. So, for example, all these encroachments on functional space of municipal bodies, municipal governments is there. And if it is not really audited and we cannot really find out what should be done, how should the local governments be freed of these encroachments? Of power, encroachments of powers, encroachments of authority. And then the 74th Amendment is almost nearly 30 years. And many of the new mayors, the women mayors who have been elected in or nominated in South India, in Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, there are 11 women mayors in municipal corporations who are all out of the 20 municipal corporations. 11 are mayors. 11 are women. And the youngest among them in Tirunanthapuram is also, they are also born much after the 74th Amendment. So I think really looking at the change in political culture, if we are really to look at how authority can be either re-established, or how a different vision of the city and the city's development can actually come about. I mean, we don't know how they will how the function of the mayor and how the authority of the mayor will be re-established in these particular cases. And there may be some I mean, there is definitely an aspect of democratization and decentralization, but we need to look at it from a different point of view. It's not because of course the politics of it, or the say for example, the city of Bangalore has not had an elected council for so long, some more than a year and a half now, and the election might not happen because of a more recent Supreme Court judgment regarding other backward castes. The Mumbai MCGM, the Mumbai government, local government, may also go in for some changes, and I think the misuse is happening in every state, in every as far as I know. I mean, whether it's Ahmedabad or whether it's now Delhi, the cabinet has passed a merger of the Delhi municipal corporations into one municipal corporation again after 15 years or 20 years. I think 15 years. So number of course, number of changes are also happening. For example, in Rajasthan, the government for 3 or 4 city corporations bifurcated the city corporations, and they formed now, I think, 8 city corporations. So more decentralization is also possible. In policy decisions and political decisions are taken to that effect. But really the issue is, where is the contestation happening, and how is the contestation really going to, because that is the perspective that we can come from. And what we probably need to do is much more solid information exchange, solid in the sense of regular information exchange, or that these contestations are happening. This is exactly what we need to look out for and encourage. It's not the All India Council of Mayors, or it's not the All India Institute, the local self-government, all these agencies who will be really contesting, because they are part of the system. They are part of, I think there's a new formation of the mayors also, which has happened a couple of months back. I don't remember what it's called. But really, if we need to look at how these agencies, can perform differently, if the obstructions and the encroachment of functional space is at least the pressure is released to some extent, or maybe even fully released, without the participation of people, without the large scale buildup of demand side. I think the decentralization experiment will go on with democratization, with elections, with political performance that is happening. They are having elections, they are having some postponement, but all these are occurring. It's a little this thing that state governments, which actually became more powerful, and what Anant was also referring to, with the political space getting but they were brought down. I mean, the local government the influence was brought down, the councillors' influence was brought down. But of course, in many bigger cities, whether it's Hyderabad or Bangalore or other bigger cities, real estate and land and the land connections with the elected representatives, with the councillors, I think through the entire last 30 years, it has been increasing and increasing. And there is probably a more powerful position in the Bangalore city mayor than all the 28 MLAs or 36 MLAs and the power and the authority that they have. And this position is only for 1 year or 2.5 years. Once the mayor may be more powerful, but we really need to look at how even in one case, even in one state, maybe we can look at doing this sort of audit to identify all these kind of encroachments which are really there, and how to get local governments rid of them. I'm trying to bring together answering all the answering some of the questions from all of them, but I can't really address it here. If we maybe we can hear from if anybody else would also like to come with some ideas. What would you say about this audit? For example, the city what is the CAG, the 74th amendment was audited by the CAG in Karnataka, and they brought out a report in 2019, I think. But the questions that we should really ask is, what functional space encroachments will be removed post this audit? Of course, the CAG comes out with an audit, and it's left to the imagination of what will happen with that report, because it is tabled in the Lok Sabha or the state assembly. But beyond that, what actually really happens? Populism in terms of, if you're saying political culture, populism has also happened. But in the face of centralization and the centralization through all these missions, what would local government populism really look like? Is another issue about political cultures. Yeah, please share any other.
Okay, so thank you, Vinan. I'm just saying, Mr. Babu Jacob is just raising his hand. Okay, if you please share your thoughts, or if you want to share anything.
Go ahead, you are unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you. If you speak, we can hear you.
Or maybe he
Please
can't
go
hear
ahead.
us. No, maybe he can't hear us.
Okay.
Who are you asking? Me?
Yes. So just I'm saying that you have raised your hand. So if you want to chip in
No.
with any of your comments.
I'm Babu Jacob. I did not raise my hand.
Oh, okay, sure. Sorry. So anyway, thank you so much. And yes, Dr. Manikanth, your thoughts. Just wrap it up.
See, to me, an audit is essentially a tool for making an assessment of what's going on, right? And the main question that I have is, who wants to use the audit as a tool here? If we know that there is a set of civil society actors who will find such an audit useful, we should definitely push for it. And I think that there are definitely a set of issues that are very, very important in large cities. I think, of course, there are useful things to do even in smaller cities. But one of the ways in which the audit could actually pan out is what has the current situation done to erode possibilities of certain kinds of economic activities in the city. And I think that's a very, very important concern for many of us. Because there are a large number of economic activities which have been badly hit by the way the city is operating. So we need to go after what those might be. So the audit could then set up an ordered list of consequences that we are concerned about. I think one of them is the disappearance of commons in our cities. It's a very, very important concern. How did this come about? What is it about the municipal law that is leading to this? What do we need to fix for this not to happen? Who are all the different kinds of actors that are coming together in this? All of those kinds of things can be then examined as part of that audit. If you say that I want to know what has happened to commons, right? I mean, we know, for example, in a city like Hyderabad, I can tell you straight away that it's a patchwork of urban governance. We have, I mean, I wanted to say this earlier. One of the things that has happened in Hyderabad, if you look at Hyderabad city's map, the municipal corporation's map over the last 20-25 years, what you will see is this. You have a center, which is the municipal corporation of Hyderabad, which has 12 satellite municipalities around it, which then get amalgamated into the city, and that becomes Greater Hyderabad Municipal Corporation. And then you have another set of new satellite municipalities that emerges, right? Why do we have these peripheral satellite municipalities that keep emerging from time to time, eventually to be gobbled up by the big city? Right? You will see a tremendous amount of very interesting local politics going on here. The MLA is ex officio member of the municipal corporation, right? Therefore, a municipality of 7 wards will have the presiding deity of the local MLA and the local MLA's brother-in-law becoming the mayor. And all of this is done in order to be able to regulate the to manage the volatility in the land markets. And what are these land markets all about? They are land markets which are actually emerging from the middle of a whole lot of commons. That is old agricultural land. When it gets urbanized, along with the agricultural land, you also urbanize the common lands, the ecological commons, right? And it is this conversion which is where all the lucre is. And that needs to be controlled in a particular way. Now, what is it about the way in which we have organized our municipalities in the law or outside of the law in our political cultures that makes these kinds of processes even possible?
So these are the contestations which are happening to some extent on the urban commons.
Yes.
And there are a number of contestations happening in, especially along water bodies and water resources.
So therefore,
But,
I'm saying that the audit should then
so
say
both
that
they would look at both the issues. Then they would look at contestations as well as the common resources, common urban commons.
I'm just saying that from an
An
audit
audit
point
should
of view,
be
from an audit point of view, I would be very interested in auditing the structure of our governance that makes these kinds of things possible. That's what the audit would do. And then that will give us the tools or the campaign points for those civil society actors who want to go after it. Like right now, most civil society actors have nothing to say about this, right? All you can do is to run after the collector, run after the urban development secretary, run after somebody else.
The contestation is continuing.
You're constantly running after something or the other, but you have no structural understanding of where is the fault line that you need to put pressure on. So
And-
that's what I think would be a useful thing to do through an audit.
So it would bring together groups which are involved with urban commons as well as with the contestation around urban commons. And
Yeah.
that is something that can be a potential thing to work with. I mean, if there are groups to work with, for what comes out for them. And this is directly going to be an encroachment on the economy, the local economy also, which the state government or the state government agencies have been looking at, have been eyeing since years together, now probably decades together. I think we should be able to learn something from how this can actually, this kind of audit can happen from the way other sort of NGOs and others have done social audit, accountability audits, and other like MKSS, like groups in in Andhra, in Telangana. We need to look at possible audit like this to start it off, and then we can always think of other topics. Expanding the local government space, expanding the local government authority, along with getting this audit organized.
Okay, so thank you. So today's discussion has really been quite engaging for all of us, and as always, we have got some of the ideas on which we can work on. In fact, we can think of doing some serious research on these aspects, especially the aspects which Professor Mayanganti has mentioned, and also some of the issues, larger issues, which Professor Bharati has also talked about. So yes, so it's a wonderful event. I think it's a learning experience for all of us, as Mr. Pena has already mentioned. And what we can see is that that whatever legislative structures are there, it needs to be created. A strong legislative structure needs to be created at the municipal level to make the Indian cities independent and their administration accountable to their citizens, because we talked about a lot about this participation and all these things, but we really do not know how to really make the city governments accountable to their citizens. So we need to strive for all these things. So once again, on behalf of the these City Conversation series, I want to thank all of you for spending your time, spending your thoughts, and for enriching us. And we hope to have your presence or participation in future City Conversation series as well. Now with this, now let me invite Mrs. Diva Goswami for formally presenting the vote of thanks.
Thanks to all of you. Thanks to IMPRI and all the others.
It's over to you, Dia.
As we come to the end of this extremely enlightening discussion, I, Dia Goswami, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, would like to formally propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. We are grateful to Mr. Vinay Bendu for taking out time for being with us and sharing such a thought-provoking talk on municipal legislative reform through the lens of politics and techno-bureaucratic processes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We thank our discussants, Professor Manjula Bharti, Dr. Anant Mayanganti, and Mr. Babu Jacob, for adding their diverse perspectives and valuable insights to the deliberation. We also thank our participants on Zoom or on Facebook Live for participating and raising pertinent questions. And we are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to our podcast. I hope that you continue to tune in on our future events and talks. Thank you once again, and I wish you all a very good evening.